When Zelensky walked out to the crowd applauding, that was a message from Europe to say, we're standing together with Ukraine. Indeed, the world is standing with Ukraine. Perhaps this is a turning point in Trump's understanding of what's going on, given the tweet, the social media message that you just made reference to. We will have to see. But there remains a huge void between what Donald Trump wants to do, because he clearly wants a deal, but then he wants to cut and run.
Now, the White House described the 15-minute meeting as very productive, and Zelensky later called it very symbolic, with the potential to become historic. Later, aboard Air Force One on his flight home, Donald Trump posted on social media saying there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, in reference to Russian strikes on Kyiv earlier this week, which killed a number of people. He added, "It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war, that he's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions." Many people are saying that this is actually the toughest language that Donald Trump has used against President Putin. And we've discussed this many times on my show. It has often felt that the strategy with Donald Trump is a sort of stick with Zelensky and a carrot with Putin. Maybe there is a change in his tone now after this funeral. Who knows? Well, let's get some reaction to that from international security expert and former Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon.
What did you think of that photograph?
I think it was hugely symbolic in St. Peter's Basilica. I mean, this day is supposed to be all about Pope Francis, his life, his works and so forth. I think he'll be smiling. He'll be looking down, pleased that his funeral brought together these two key stakeholders, particularly after that bust-up that you referred to in the Oval Office. It also brought Donald Trump out of his comfort zone, out of his lair in the Oval Office, to Europe to understand better what's going on. You know, when Zelensky walked out to the crowd applauding, that was a message from Europe to say, we're standing together with Ukraine. Indeed, the world is standing with Ukraine. Perhaps this is a turning point in Trump's understanding of what's going on, given the tweet, the social media message that you just made reference to. We will have to see. But there remains a huge void between what Donald Trump wants to do, because he clearly wants a deal, but then he wants to cut and run. He doesn't want to support any of the long-term security needs that Ukraine clearly is calling for. And President Putin, we know, will sign any deal right now, given the space and time to then rearm and regroup. He still has a long-term desire to hold all of Ukraine. So a lot of work still to do, but perhaps a wake-up call for the way Donald Trump looks at the situation.
And of course, it's interesting that the sort of big message from this day, it was the sort of philosophy of the late Pope Francis, which was to build bridges. Maybe, just maybe, some bridges may have been built today. But in terms of where we think the sort of raw politics are, in terms of where, you know, all the different sides are, Tobias, I mean, it doesn't feel like that much progress has been made. It feels like this week and the last sort of couple of days, the line which has come out, particularly Trump did this big interview with Time magazine yesterday saying, look, you know, kind of indicating that sort of bits of Ukraine are just now going to have to remain within Russia. This idea that Crimea is just going to have to remain within Russia. Where do you think the contours are at the moment?
Well, firstly, I think it's been a wake-up call for Donald Trump himself. He's come into office with that big promise to end it within all 24 hours. That clearly didn't happen. And he can't simply use the might of the Oval Office, the White House itself, to command other people to do his bidding. Statecraft is much more complicated than the commercial deals that he's used to. And he's learning the hard way that that's what needs to happen. The hard work behind the scenes to work out what that compromise is. And it was actually Mayor Glitschko, the mayor of Kyiv, that dared to suggest we may have to relinquish some land for the moment in order to strike a deal. But you're still left with the long-term security concerns. Who's going to provide that? And so the messaging that you got after that meeting from Zelensky is to try and keep America close. And we need to help persuade America that it's in America's interests for European security to remain strong. Because if we have problems with Russia that won't stop in Ukraine, it will ripple out and affect America in the longer term. So we're better if we're united, if we're on the same page. But I stress, what Putin is trying to do, emulating his hero, Stalin, and advancing the old Soviet-era influence over Eastern Europe, that's not going to stop.
And it feels like when we look at the different components of what some kind of lasting ceasefire could mean. There's kind of like a couple of components. There's the idea of whether Ukraine should cede some ground to Russia, which is very contentious. Then there is the issue of resources in Ukraine, minerals, and it's very clear that Donald Trump does want a cut of those minerals. And then, of course, there's a very important issue of security guarantees, and it's you've got trying to get three big elements together in terms of making this ceasefire last, and it doesn't really feel like there is adequate movement on any of those three components at the moment.
Yeah, you demonstrate how difficult this is, and it cannot be signed overnight. And this is the trouble with Donald Trump, is that he's just wanting any deal. He doesn't want victory. He wants a way out. That's what he's trying to do, is back away from having any involvement in what's going on in Ukraine. I'm afraid that there are flashbacks of Afghanistan, when Donald Trump did a deal with the Taliban, sidelining the Afghan government, doing deals with the adversary, and then walking away completely. Now, look where that ended up. And we can't have history repeating itself. And that's why you've got heads of government right across Europe scratching their heads saying, well, what do we do next? And I'm actually pleased that Britain, France, and others are getting together and saying, well, that's why we need this coalition of the willing, because if America does dial back and Russia dials up, essentially, who's going to support Ukraine and prevent this from spreading into a wider European war? Can I just say on the minerals as well, it's worth saying, I believe this is a complete red herring. If you're familiar with Ukraine and its history of the last 30, 40 years, it's been run by oligarchs who are good at making money, at exploiting the situation. And if there was any minerals to be had, they would have been dug up long ago. There are mineral wealth there, there's no doubt about it, but they're underneath a layer of ordnance right now, of unexploded military weapon systems. So it's going to be a long time before anybody is digging up rare earths and selling them on the international market.
Interesting. And look, just before I let you go, Tobias, it feels like the kind of line from the UK government has shifted from boots on the ground to something very different now, the potential of training troops. How do you feel about that?
Well, it's boots on the ground is now sort of totemic, isn't it, for investing time and effort to support the Ukraine. The first step will actually be a no-fly zone. If you recall, Israel, when it was attacked by Iran, that's what needs to happen, is some form of ability to knock down the missiles and the drones and to keep the infrastructure and the Ukrainian people safe. That's the sort of thinking that needs to be put together if there is a coalition. What's so sad is that Trump could end this completely by giving the weapon systems to allowing the country that was invaded to actually win. But unfortunately, he's become too close to the adversary, to Putin, bringing Putin in from the cold. That's led us to the situation where we are today.
And it's so interesting, just like when you read between the lines of what he's saying, the penny might have just been dropping with Donald Trump, that he has been strung along. You know, he says maybe he's just tapping me along, which is quite a big reveal. Look, Tobias, always good to catch up with you. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. That's Tobias Ellwood.